Welcome back, everyone. Pal Ponder All Weather here. In this update, we're going to start off with the overall temperature anomalies, where we stand so far for summer. The beginning of summer was June 1st. That is actually the first day of meteorologically summer. That's when they start keeping track for record keeping purposes. And since then, all the way through July 22nd, we've seen much of the middle of the country overall between the average high and low temperature being average to even slightly below average in a good part of Colorado into Kansas and a good part of Kentucky, as well as into North Carolina. It's really just the southern states where the cold fronts really haven't made it that far south. You've seen well above average temperature anomalies. Even in the desert Southwest, you actually started the first couple of weeks in June below average, but obviously here lately you've been seeing all those record temperatures out in this region. But going into the precipitation front, we've seen drier conditions out in these regions overall, where you've seen a lot of that record heat. Into the middle of the country, we've got a lot of blue showing up on the map. But remember, this was the region that was really dry in the springtime. In fact, portions of the Texas Panhandle were under an exceptional drought, and they, in fact, erased the drought since then and replaced it with just no drought at all. But so this area has actually seen well above average precipitation, but it hasn't been that way for the entire year. But you can see most where the rainfall has fallen, it's really kind of be blowing up across east of the Rockies and then traversing east southeastward with very heavy rain traversing along this corridor. In fact, the East Coast has seen an abundance amount of rain, and obviously up here into portions of the Northeast, you've seen a ton of rain. But where you've seen drier conditions as of late is really across portions of the Ohio Valley and obviously much of Texas and central and south Texas, where the cold fronts really just haven't made it that far south. You've been under well drier conditions. So going forward, it's going to be a hot week, folks. I mean, the heat really starts to come back with a vengeance in the big way. A lot of these across the area, across the U.S., you're going to be seeing some of your hottest temperatures so far of this summer. So going into today for your high temperatures, the hundreds expand back into Oklahoma, back into Kansas. They share down here into Nebraska. They even creep all the way up into Montana. And those will be expanding eastbound as we get deeper into the week. But for right now, you're still experiencing those comfortable light conditions across a good part of the Ohio Valley and much of the Northeast. You're widespread into the 80s this afternoon, but you can actually see where the ridge of high pressure is, folks. So there's the well above average temperature anomalies underneath that ridge of high pressure. Is just on the northern periphery of this ridge. We're going to have storm development blowing up across these regions, and likely about 4, 5, 6 o'clock this afternoon, there's going to be a storm complex going to be blowing up towards portions of Missouri. And that's exactly where the Storm Prediction Center has that slight risk for severe storms today. It's not a tornadic setup, but definitely some higher wind gusts across these regions. Some of these could mix in with some quarter-size hail within this corridor. But yeah, kind of being high alert of this, mesoscale convective system, and going to be kind of blowing up across the northwestern regions and diving east southeastward into the later afternoon, early evening time frame. There's also another pocket of energy up here across portions of Pennsylvania and upstate New York that could be seeing some stronger induced showers and thunderstorms later on this afternoon. But it's really all about the ridge. You follow this ridge, and underneath that sinking ridge, that's where you're going to be seeing all the well above average temperature anomalies. Is really going to be parked over New Mexico. You're going to be seeing your hottest temperature so far this summer. Temperatures well into the hundreds. In fact, you might even top out, say, 105, 108 in some of these regions across into New Mexico, central New Mexico. But getting into the panhandle of Texas, you're going to be starting to seeing those 104s, 105s, 106s starting to show up on the map, with the still cooler than normal anomalies still infiltrating a good part of the Northeast. So here's the setup for Tuesday. So again, just on the northern periphery of that ridge, you're going to have another convective complex really start to blow up across the portions of the Dakotas, getting back into Aberdeen region, into the Sioux Falls regions, again, into the kind of the heat of the afternoon time frame. And there's the temperature. So as the ridge really starts to expand, it starts to share those higher temperature anomalies for the middle of the country. So now you're talking places into Kansas reaching 104, back into Nebraska, well into the 90s, if not almost triple digit temperatures. Even Minneapolis gets into the action of 98 degrees. That's obviously the hottest temperature so far you've seen so far. Even International Falls, all the way up to the Canadian border, could reach 92 degrees. But you can actually see down here in the southeastern regions, you start creeping up as well, back into the middle 90s, upper 90s, even along the East Coast in the Carolinas, 94, 95 degrees, and even along into New York City, you start getting into the action into the 90-degree temperatures where you might spread a couple of days as those temperatures start to tick up. But Wednesday's really the day of my concern on the severe weather front. Right now, the Storm Prediction Center has a slight risk. I think this could easily be upgraded to an enhanced risk by the time we get closer to this event. This is probably the most high impactful event coming up for the week ahead. So we are going to be seeing a fairly significant storm complex blowing up across the northern periphery of this ridge. So anywhere from Iowa down here to Illinois, into Indiana, back here into Ohio. These areas are the most greatest concern as we get closer to the 4, 5, 6 o'clock time frame. In fact, even the tornado parameters are hinting at pretty high. So the EHI values are fairly significant across these regions. That's why I feel like this could easily be bumped up to an enhanced risk, if not a 5% probability of tornado risk, even a possibly 10% if we get closer to this event. I think it's going to come down to, getting into that morning time frame. If things start to come together, we could probably bump up to a 10% probability of tornadic spin-ups across these regions. So it's something I'm going to be fine-tuning as we get closer to this particular setup. But right now, Wednesday looks to be the most greatest concern as we get into the peak heating of the day around 4 o'clock. We're probably going to be seeing a convective complex start to originate across portions of Iowa, getting near the Chicago region, heading into portions of Indiana, fishtailing down into Ohio. It's likely going to be starting off with a big hail producer, likely some tornadic spin-ups across these regions, and then transferring into a more of a squall line type setup with some damaging winds, 60, 70 miles per hour is likely not out of the question, as this whole convective complex really highlights over the 6 o'clock to midnight time frame across these regions. That'll be on the day on Wednesday. So as we transfer to Thursday, this is the Saharan dust map, right? So right now, this time of year, we've got a lot of Saharan dust coming off Africa, and that's really has been the demise of NVEST 95L, which we'll show you. It's only got a 20% probability of developing now. Got a lot of African dust out there, and in fact, this is traversing all across the Atlantic and could actually reach in portions of the US by the time we hit Thursday. So not only you're going to be dealing with the higher conditions down here in Texas and Oklahoma, you're going to probably see a lot of haze, poor air quality across these regions, because some of that Saharan dust is going to be infiltrating, taking advantage of that south wind, right? You got a south wind, that's a warm wind, and that's going to push some of this Saharan dust into Texas through across the southern plains. So don't be surprised you start to see some haziness in the sky across these regions coming up on the day on Thursday, as this ridge just continues to expand and almost dominate a good part of the lower 48. The only cooler anomalies in town is a fairly significant trough across the northwestern periphery, say in the British Columbia region, into the Pacific Northwest, Seattle. Those areas are going to be in the 70s, really nice, comfortable conditions. But for the rest of the country, you got widespread 90s and the triple digits just expand. And now a good part of the Northeast is going to be ticking upwards. So now you're likely going to be seeing temperatures in the mid 90s across these regions, even some areas, even into the upper 90s. But taking you back into the Caribbean, we've got this wave, right? This 95L that's going to be coming across. So It's got a lot of shear, and it's got a lot of Saharan dust mixing in with that atmosphere, but it's still going into a pretty precipitable type of environment. So these areas, even though it's not somewhat even organized as far as the tropical development front, you're still going to get a lot of rain. In fact, 95L likely will be impacting pretty parts of Central America with some heavier rain. But you can see where the heat indexes have literally been off the chart with these well above average temperature anomalies draped across a good part of southern Florida. You've got excessive heat warnings almost on a daily basis. I think I read 43 days in a row Miami's hit 100 degrees or better on the heat index front. I mean, some of these areas have hit 118. I think the other day it was 118. The dew point was 83. The temperature was 98. But with the dew point of 83 made the heat index 118 degrees, folks. That's what it feels like to the body. So that has just been crazy. Crazy warm down there in South Florida. But there's the heat. You're going to be sharing the heat by the time we get into Friday, and that's likely going to be your maxed out day as far as the US goes, with the most hottest temperatures on a widespread basis you've seen so far this summer, with the 90s showing up on the map, even mid 90s back into Virginia, upper 90s across New Jersey, back into maybe New York City. These areas are going to be seeing those hottest temperatures of the year. That'll be on the day on Friday. But there's the tropics, folks. There's Don, right? Don's been out there for like 2 weeks. In fact, if it became the first hurricane named hurricane of the season, the further northernmost hurricane ever recorded in the month of July, that goes to show you how well above average temperature anomalies these waters out here in the Atlantic. That's 47 north, folks. That is extremely north for a tropical system to still be holding together. But further south, there's been the demise of 95L. Now we're only got a 20% probability. It's basically not going to happen, right? It's going to continue westbound and likely going to be impacting heavier rains back into Central America. But looking on the EPS front, it pretty much, where there were showing some signs of maybe possibly this holding together. But again, you can have the warmest waters out there, but if you got Saharan dust and you've got a lot of shear, which you do in the Caribbean, it's not going to be, that's not a recipe for tropical storm development, folks. So there's going to be another fairly active wave that comes off the coast of Africa. But even that one's likely going to be turning further north. And if it does get named, it's likely going to be a fish storm, which all the storms have been so far this season. So we are going to the month of August. We'll watch everything out there. But El Nino is here. Yes, we've got extremely warm waters, but we still got Saharan dust to contend with. And we still got a lot of shear happening into the Caribbean that would likely rip anything apart if it gets close into these regions. So headed into this weekend, we're maxing out Friday, Saturday time frame across a good part of the lower 48. Most of the lower 48 is gonna be above average. So that's when the trop maybe even sneaks back in, not as cool up here, even into the Pacific Northwest. So yeah, it's gonna be plenty warm across a good part, if not all, of the lower 48. And that's exactly where the Climate Prediction Center has all the heat, right? I mean, kind of very rare to see, the only areas that they don't have excessive heat is really across these coastal regions, and then further on the northern tier of the northern areas across the upper Great Lakes and the far extreme portions of New England. But everybody else has a lot of heat going into the end to the month of July. And if you put all that together as far as on the precipitation front, again, where all the ridge is going to be the most dominant, you're going to get a lot of sinking air, and it's going to be next to impossible. So you get a lot of donuts showing up on the map with a lot of dry air. And you got some squeeze play trying to happen with the monsoonal flow that's been basically non-existent. You have starting to see some showers and thunderstorms in the Tucson area. And that may be starting to mix into portions of New Mexico, but they desperately need the rain out here. So they'll take anything they might be able to bubble up in those well above, well into the triple digit type atmosphere But where the northwest flow is going to be most prevalent is really across our northern states, across the upper peninsula, through the Great Lakes, and even into the portions of the northeast. You're going to be getting more heavy rain, not like flooding rains, but still heavier rain to be adding to those saturated soils. And further south, you can see where Florida is, where all the abundance amount of moisture and where the fronts have been kind of reaching out here, you're still going to get some heavier rain. So along with the higher heat index content regions out these regions, you're still going to get obviously the atmosphere is very moist. It doesn't take much to overturn that atmosphere. Likely rains for 30 minutes or so, then it kind of dries out and you're back to that, sauna into these regions. But heading into next week and the beginning of next week and the first part ending July, the first couple of days of August, we actually have another decent significant trough coming back into parts of the Great Lakes and back to the Northeast. So even though you do warm up in these regions for a couple of days, by the end of the week, that's quickly going to replace with much more pleasant light conditions of what you've been experiencing as of late as the ridge pushes further south. So as the coolness sneaks in further north, that's just going to maximize this ridge further south. And you see all the red start to show up on the map. And underneath that, you've got a lot of heat, folks. So by the time we head into August, the first time frame, you're putting together, 7, 8, 10 days of 100 temperature heat back in Dallas. You're probably going to be seeing almost close to your hottest temperatures of the season. 107, 104 back into Mississippi, 104 in Alabama, 106, well into the hundreds in towards the Atlanta region, back into South Carolina, 104. So the triple digit heat really returns with a vengeance once that actually trough kind of comes in from the northwest. So you're going to be experiencing those cooler temperatures while much of the South bakes under that drier soil and the atmosphere really starts to heat up in a big way. So guys, I appreciate you guys watching. Do like this video, definitely hit the subscribe button and catch me next update where I protect you before and after the storm.